She was shoved straight into the 6-tier champagne tower. Glass shattered the sound, ricocheting through the Celeste ballroom like a gunshot. Someone in the crowd snorted. Well, breaking something. Kind of suits her flea market dress. Champagne soaked Grace Miller's pale grey linen dress, dripping from her hair, chilling her skin. She stood there, frozen for a moment, her ballet flat slipping slightly on the wet marble floor. The laughter swelled sharp and cruel as guests pulled out their phones to capture the moment Grace didn't flinch or wipe her face. Her dark eyes, steady and unyielding, scanned the room, taking in every smirk, every pointed finger. The bride Melissa stood with a triumphant grin, her white gown gleaming under the chandeliers. Nobody cared who Grace was. They saw her plain dress, her bare face, and assumed she was a nobody crashing the party. That is, until a man walked through the ballroom doors, draped his coat over her shoulders and said, "She is my wife, and this wedding ends now." Grace stood dripping, her posture straight, her hands loose at her sides. The champagne stung her eyes, but she didn't blink. The room buzzed with whispers, some shocked, some mocking, but she didn't move. Her silence was heavier than the laughter, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Melissa's bridesmaids in their sapphire blue gowns giggled behind their manicured hands, but their eyes darted nervously like they sensed the air shifting. Melissa herself tossed her head, her blonde curls bouncing, her smile sharp as a blade. "Guess you're the star of the show now," she called out, her voice laced with venom. "The groom." Daniel stood near the stage, his face pale, clutching a small envelope like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The crowd's laughter faded into an uneasy hum, as if they could feel something big was coming. Something nobody could predict. "Hey, before we dive deeper, can you do me a quick favour? Grab your phone, hit that like button, leave a comment below and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this about real pain, real strength and real justice. They hit close to home for so many of us. It's just a small way to keep walking through these moments together. Alright, let's get back to Grace and what happened that night. It all started a few hours earlier when Grace stepped into the Celeste Ballroom at San Francisco's most exclusive hotel. The place was a spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across the room tables draped in white linen with gold embroidery, and a 6-tier champagne tower sparkling like a centerpiece of liquid gold. The guests were the elite of the elite venture capitalists with slick smiles, startup founders in tailored suits, media mogul flashing diamond cufflinks and practice charm. Grace didn't belong, at least not to their eyes. Her soft grey linen dress was simple, its square neckline modest. No sequins or plunging cuts. Her ballet flats made no sound on the marble floor. Her dark hair fell loosely around her shoulders. No updo or curls, and her face was bare. No makeup to hide her natural glow. She carried a small clutch. Her movements quiet, like she was used to being invisible in rooms like this. The bridesmaids clocked her the moment she walked in. They were gathered near the entrance, a pack of sapphire blue dresses and perfect makeup, their laughter sharp and practiced. Melissa, the bride, swept over in her custom-designed gown, a cloud of white silk and diamonds that screamed money. She took Grace's hand, her smile warm for the crowd, but her grip cold. "Grace, you made it," she said. Loud enough for nearby guests to hear, then leaned in her voice, dropping to a hiss. "I invited you out of courtesy, but this is a wedding, not a PTA meeting." The bridesmaids snickered, their eyes raking over Grace's dress like it was a personal offence. Vanessa, a tall bridesmaid with a model's posture and a viper's tongue, leaned forward. "Wearing that to my wedding, bold choice." Grace didn't flinch. She met Melissa's gaze, her face calm, and said, "I'm here to celebrate you." Then she reached into her clutch, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it over. "Just a little gift. Wishing you both happiness." Melissa took it, her smile tight, and tucked it away without looking. As Grace moved through the crowd, a venture capitalist named Marcus, with a smug grin and a voice that carried, spotted her near a floral display. "Is that the help?" he said to his group, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "She's dressed like she's here to mop the floors." His friends laughed, their eyes darting to Grace's plain dress. Her fingers tightened on her clutch, but she kept walking, her steps measured. Marcus didn't stop. "Hey, miss, the kitchen's that way," he called, pointing toward a service door. The laughter grew sharp and biting as guests turned to stare. Grace paused, her shoulders squaring, and turned to face him. "I'm a guest," she said, her voice low but clear, like a bell cutting through fog. Marcus's grin faltered, but he waved her off, turning back to his group, with a shrug, like her presence was a minor annoyance. Near the gift table, Grace placed her envelope carefully, her fingers lingering on the paper as if it held a secret. A socialite named Claire, all fake tan and vlogger energy, spotted her and snorted. "What's this, a grocery list?" she said, her voice loud enough to draw chuckles from the nearby guests. "Hope it's not a coupon for discount fabric." The laughter spread, cutting through the air like glass. Grace didn't react. She straightened up her hands, brushing the table's edge, and looked at Claire. "It's something meaningful," she said, her voice steady, like she was stating a fact nobody else could see. Claire rolled her eyes, but a man nearby, a quiet investor with wire-rimmed glasses, glanced at the envelope and froze. He adjusted his tie, his fingers fumbling, and muttered something to his wife about Carter Holdings. The words were soft, but they made Claire's smile waver like she'd missed something big. Grace tried to find a quiet spot near a window, the San Francisco skyline glowing against the dusk. A group of influencers, their phones always out, zeroed in on her. Ethan, a guy with a flashy watch and a fake laugh, snapped a photo of her without asking. "This is the vibe," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The I got lost on my way to a book club aesthetic." His friends cackled, already typing captions for their stories. Grace's shoulders tensed, her fingers brushing her clutch, but she didn't turn. She kept her eyes on the city lights like they were holding her steady. Ethan kept going louder now. "She's probably here to pitch her Etsy shop to the big shots." Grace turned her head slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "I'm here for a friend," she said. Her voice so calm it cut through the noise. Ethan's grin slipped, but before he could recover, an older woman nearby, a philanthropist in a pearl choker, leaned over and whispered, "I saw her name on a museum donor list last year." Grace didn't react, but her fingers relaxed like the words were a quiet lifeline. Daniel the groom stood near the gift table, his hands fidgeting as he opened Grace's envelope. His eyes widened as he read the note inside. Advanced $5 million pending review of ethical standards. His face drained of colour, like he'd just seen his company's future teetering on the edge. He glanced at Grace, who was now standing by the bar, and his hand shook slightly as he tucked the envelope into his pocket. A woman nearby, a tech analyst with a sharp suit and sharper eyes, noticed his reaction and leaned closer. "Is that from Carter Holdings?" she asked, her voice low. Daniel nodded almost imperceptibly, and the woman's eyes flicked to Grace, her expression shifting from curiosity to something like respect. Grace didn't see it. She was too busy adjusting her clutch, her movements deliberate, like she was bracing herself for what was coming next. The cruelty kept coming. During a toast, a tech bro named Tyler, all swagger and overpriced sneakers, spotted Grace near the bar. He raised his glass, his voice booming. "To the girl who thought a bedsheet was formal wear," he called out, grinning like he'd just won an award. The guests around him laughed, their phones already out, snapping pictures of Grace's plain dress and ballet flats. Grace's hands stilled on her glass, her fingers tightening for a moment, but she didn't look at him. She set the glass down with a soft clink and said, I dress for myself, not your approval." Her voice was quiet, but it carried, making Tyler's grin falter. A woman nearby, a journalist with a notepad, jotted something down her eyes, flicking to Grace with a mix of curiosity and respect. Tyler laughed it off, but his buddies shifted uncomfortably, like they sensed the room tilting slightly. Grace tried to slip away to a quieter corner, but Vanessa, the tall bridesmaid, cut her off near a floral arch. "You're not seriously staying, are you?" she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "This is an exclusive event, not a soup kitchen." The guests nearby snickered, their eyes raking over Grace's soaked dress. Vanessa leaned closer, her perfume sharp and overwhelming. "Do us all a favour and leave before you embarrass yourself more." Grace's fingers brushed the edge of her clutch, her movement slow, like she was measuring her response. She looked at Vanessa, her eyes calm but piercing. "I was invited," she said, her voice low but firm. Vanessa scoffed, but a man in a corner booth, an old college friend of Melissa's, overheard, and frowned like he was trying to place Grace's face. He didn't say anything, but his silence felt heavy, like he knew something the others didn't. As Grace stood near a dessert table, a fashion influencer named Zoe, with a loud laugh and a designer clutch, pointed at her and called out, "Someone tell this girl weddings aren't for wallflowers." The crowd around her burst into laughter, their eyes glinting with amusement. Zoe kept going, her voice sharp. "What's next? Showing up in pyjamas? This is pathetic." Grace's hand paused on a dessert spoon, her fingers trembling slightly, but she didn't look up. She set the spoon down carefully, her movements precise, and said, "I'm here for love, not a fashion show." Zoe's laugh caught in her throat, and a woman nearby, an art curator with a quiet demeanour, watched Grace closely, her fingers tapping her wine glass like she was starting to see something the others missed. The photo session was another gauntlet. Grace approached the stage area where the couple was posing with their VIP guests. She wasn't pushy, she just wanted a quick picture, a memory of her old friend's wedding. But Rachel, a petite bridesmaid with a mean girl, smirk and overdone eyeliner, stepped in front of her. "Sorry, this section's for special guests and partners," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "You'll need to take a seat over there." She pointed to a corner table near the service entrance. Another bridesmaid, Sophie, with a nasally voice and a fake laugh, added, "Better keep her away from the champagne tower, looks like shaky hands to me." The crowd nearby tittered, their eyes darting to Grace, waiting for her to crumble. She didn't. She looked at Rachel, her expression calm but unyielding, and said, "I'll stay where I'm welcome." Rachel's smirk faltered, but she stepped aside like something in Grace's gaze made her second guesses herself. A finance exec named Paul Boulding, and full of himself, caught sight of Grace as she moved away from the stage. He was chatting with a group of investors, his voice loud and self-important. "Grace is that?" He started, his eyes widening with recognition. Grace shook her head subtly, her lips barely moving, signalling him to stay quiet. Paul stopped mid-sentence, his mouth snapping shut, and he turned back to his group, his face flushed. The other investors looked confused, but one of them, a woman with a sharp bob and a tablet in hand, glanced at Grace and frowned like she was trying to place her. Grace didn't acknowledge them. She just adjusted her clutch and walked toward a quieter corner, her steps even, like she was used to dodging attention. She didn't want. During a dance number, a media mogul named Diana, with a designer handbag and a practiced smile, leaned toward her friend and said loud enough for Grace to hear, "Some people think showing up is enough to belong." Her friend, a reality TV star with a fake tan, laughed. Yeah, like she thought a clearance rack dress would get her into the inner circle. The words landed like a slap, and nearby guests turned to stare. Grace's hand paused mid-motion as she reached for a napkin, her fingers trembling slightly, but she didn't look up. She folded the napkin carefully, her movements precise, and said, "I'm here for the vows, not the guest list." Diana's smile froze and her friend's laugh died in her throat. A waiter passing by gave Grace a small nod, like he'd seen her strength and wanted her to know it. Grace found a moment of peace near a display of orchids, their petals soft against the chaos of the room. She ran her fingers lightly over one, her face softening for the first time all night. But Sophie, the nasally bridesmaid, wasn't done. She sauntered over her heels, clicking aggressively. "What you think touching the flowers makes you classy," she said, her voice caring to the nearby tables. "This isn't a community garden, sweetheart." The guests around her laughed their phones out, ready to capture Grace's reaction. Grace's hands stilled on the pedal, her shoulders straightening. She looked at Sophie, her eyes calm but sharp, and said, "Beauty doesn't need an audience." Sophie's smirk wavered, and she turned away, muttering something under her breath. A woman nearby, an art dealer with a quiet presence, watched Grace closely, her fingers tapping her wine glass like she was piecing something together. As the evening wore on, a startup CEO named Liam, with a loud voice and a louder ego, spotted Grace near a buffet table. "Who invited the librarian?" He called out, his laugh booming across the room. "She looks like she's here to check out a book, not celebrate a wedding." The guests around him roared, their eyes glinting with cruel amusement. Liam leaned closer, his breath heavy with whiskey. "Go on, grab some leftovers and head home, sweetheart." Grace's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. She set her plate down carefully, her movements deliberate, and faced him. "I'm here for a promise, not your permission," she said, her voice even like she was stating a simple truth. Liam's laugh faltered, and a man nearby, a silent partner in Daniel's company, overheard and frowned, his fingers drumming on the table like he was starting to question the room's judgment. The champagne tower moment was the breaking point. The MC had just called the couple to pour the first toast, the crowd gathering around the glittering six-tier structure. Grace stood near the back, her hands folded, watching quietly. Melissa, radiant in her gown, slipped as she reached for the bottle, her elbow slamming into Grace with enough force to send her crashing. Into the tower, glass shattered, champagne exploded across her body, soaking her dress and hair. The room gasped, then erupted in laughter. Melissa covered her mouth, her eyes glinting with fake surprise. "Oops, guess some people just find the worst places to stand," she said, her voice dripping with glee. The bridesmaids doubled over their laughter, echoing off the chandeliers. Guests snapped photos, their flashes blinding. Grace pushed herself up her dress, clinging to her skin, her hair dripping. But she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She stood, her eyes locked on Melissa, her silence louder than the chaos around her, as Grace stood there, champagne dripping from her hair, a guest, an actress named Leia, with a reality show and a fake laugh, pulled out her phone and started recording. "This is gold," she said, her voice gleeful. The nobody who thought she could crash an A-list wedding captioned this when you aim too high and land in champagne. The crowd around her laughed, some joining in with their own phones, zooming in on Grace's soaked dress. Grace's fingers twitched like she wanted to reach for something, but she didn't. She stood there, her posture straight, her eyes locked on Eula. "You might want to check the guest list before you post," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. Leia laughed, but her smile wavered when a man nearby, a quiet investor with grey hair, leaned over and murmured something to her. She stopped recording, her face paling, and shoved her phone back into her purse. Suddenly silent, Daniel had been watching from the stage. He'd opened Grace's envelope earlier, his hands shaking as he read the handwritten note inside. Advanced topic $5 million pending review of ethical standards. His face went pale like he'd seen his company's future dissolve. He stepped forward, his jaw tight, and grabbed the mic from the MC. "I'm sorry, everyone," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "I can't go through with this wedding." The room went silent, the laughter dying instantly. Melissa's smile vanished, her hands clutching her gown. "What?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel looked at Grace, still dripping with champagne, and said, "I just found out the woman you all pushed aside is the wife of Owen Carter, the lead investor in my company. She came here to judge our character, and we failed." The crowd froze, their phones lowering their whispers, stopping moments after Daniel's announcement. A woman in a sleek blazer. Melissa's event planner, Tara, rushed to the stage, her face flushed with panic. She whispered something to Melissa, who snapped, "Fix it!" Now Tara turned to Grace, her smile forced and syrupy. "We're so sorry for the mix-up," she said loudly, like she was performing for the crowd. "Let's get you cleaned up and we'll comp your meal." "Okay." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable, like Grace was a charity case who'd wandered in by mistake. Guests murmured, some nodding approvingly at Tara's kindness. Grace didn't move. She looked at Tara, her eyes calm but unyielding, and said, "I don't need your napkins or your pity." Tara's smile froze, and the crowd's murmurs died down. A man at a nearby table, a lawyer who'd been quiet all night, set down his drink and said almost to himself, "That's Owen Carter's wife." The words were soft, but they spread like a ripple, making heads turn. Melissa wasn't done. She lunged forward, her face red, her voice a scream. "You're leaving me for her!" she shouted, pointing at Grace. "She's a nobody. No makeup, cheap dress. A total downgrade." The guests gasped, some stepping back, others staring at Grace, waiting for her to react. Grace stood silently, her wet dress clinging to her. Her face calm, but her eyes sharp, like she was seeing every detail of Melissa's unravelling. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The doors at the back of the ballroom swung open and the room changed in an instant. As Melissa's voice echoed, a tech journalist named Hannah with a sharp tongue and a sharper pen leaned toward her friend and whispered loud enough for Grace to hear. "She's probably just here to scam a free meal." Her friend, a blogger with a fake smile, laughed. "Yeah, look at her standing there like a drowned rat. Pathetic." The words cut through the air, and nearby, guests turned to stare, their smirks barely hidden. Grace's hands stilled, her fingers brushing the edge of her clutch, but she didn't look up. She adjusted her stance, her movement slow, and said, "I came for a friend, not a spotlight." Hannah's laugh caught in her throat, and a man nearby, a silent investor in Daniel's company, overheard and frowned, his fingers tapping his phone like he was starting to piece things together. Owen Carter stepped into the spotlight, his presence commanding the space without a word. He was young, early 30s, in a crisp white shirt, no tie, no bodyguards, just quiet confidence. His dark eyes scanned the room, softening when they found Grace. He walked straight to her, ignoring the stares, and gently draped his jacket over her shoulders, covering her soaked dress. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint drip of champagne hitting the floor. Owen looked at Daniel, his voice calm but cutting. "I will not invest in any company where people treat decency like garbage just because it doesn't wear a designer label," he said. Then he turned to Melissa and her bridesmaids, his gaze steady. "You didn't lose a deal, you lost the chance to be a decent man." He pulled Grace close to his arm around her, and the crowd parted as they moved toward the exit. As they walked out, a woman in the crowd, a venture capitalist named Ellen with a reputation for no-nonsense deals, slipped her phone out and sent a quick text. Her face was pale, her fingers moving fast. Later it came out she'd pulled her firm support from Daniel's company, citing ethical concerns. The decision wasn't loud, but it spread through the room, making the other investors shift uncomfortably. Grace didn't glance her way. She didn't need to. Her presence, even soaked in champagne, was starting to rewrite the room's story. Just before they reached the doors, a man named Greg, an old friend of Melissa's from college, stood up, his face flushed with shame. "Grace, wait!" He called, his voice cracking. "I didn't know, I should have said something." His hands fidgeted like he was trying to undo years of silence. Grace paused her hand in Owen's and looked back at him. Her expression wasn't angry or cold. It was just knowing. "You didn't need to know," she said, her voice soft but clear. Greg sank back into his seat, his face burning as the weight of his inaction hit him. The room watched, and for the first time, some of the guests looked ashamed, like they were seeing their own cruelty reflected back. The fallout was swift. By morning, X was flooded with videos of the Champagne Tower crash, but also of Owen's entrance. His words echoing like a verdict. Melissa's influencer deals dried up her sponsors. Citing image issues, Vanessa was dropped from her modelling agency after the footage went viral. Rachel's startup lost its biggest client who'd been at the wedding and seen her cruelty firsthand. Sophie deleted her social media accounts, unable to handle the backlash. Daniel's company tanked the $80 million deal gone with Owen's withdrawal. Jared, the startup founder, who'd mocked Grace's dress, was seen begging for a meeting with Owen's team, only to be turned away. His company folded within weeks, his reputation in tatters. Claire, the socialite who mocked Grace's gift, found her vlog channel demonetized after viewers flooded the comments with screenshots of her cruelty. Her followers dropped overnight, her brand crumbling under the weight of public outrage. Tyler, the tech bro who'd raised a toast to Grace's bedsheet dress, was quietly let go from his startup after investors cited cultural misalignment. Zoe, the fashion influencer, lost her sponsorship with a major designer when the wedding footage went viral. Her taunts replayed across X. Hannah, the tech journalist, faced a firestorm of criticism after her outlet published an exposé on the wedding naming her as one of the instigators. Her byline vanished from the site within days. Grace didn't comment on any of it. She didn't post or give interviews. She just went back to her life, quiet as ever, like the night had been just another moment. But people who knew her old classmates' neighbours, even the florist she bought from every week, started to see her differently. The woman in the plain dress wasn't just Grace. She was Grace Miller, wife of Owen Carter, a woman who'd grown up with everything but chose to live with nothing to prove, a woman who'd faced cruelty and walked away taller. Not because she fought, but because she didn't have to. Weeks later, at a small art gallery opening, Grace was spotted in a simple navy dress, her hair loose, her face bare. Owen was beside her, his hand brushing hers as they spoke to the curator. Nobody whispered. Nobody mocked. They just watched, like they were seeing her for the first time. She caught someone staring and gave a small, calm smile, her eyes saying she didn't need their approval. She never had. Sometimes life hits you hard, and you stand there dripping wet with everyone laughing. But Grace showed us you don't need to shout to be heard, you just need to be. And that's enough. You know that feeling when the world tries to break you, but you keep standing. You weren't wrong. You weren't alone. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.